Thank you for joining us today, everybody. I'd like to give an overview now of the second chapter in our wonderful book, and we're looking at particularly the sustainable livelihood approach in mountain areas, with a particular focus on a case study in an area in the Nepalese Himalaya. And this is with my colleagues. I'm Carl Cater from Swansea and the University of Highlands and Islands, and this is together with Maggie Miller, who's in Canada at George Brown College in Toronto, and Ravindra Nyaupane, who's at the University of Roehampton in London in England. So we look very much in this chapter about themes that are pertinent through the book, looking at the issues that face mountain regions and the challenges that they face, particularly because of their topography, which then limits the livelihood options that are available to them. Now, a livelihood is defined as the ability to create a living out of one's resources. And it's used a lot in development studies to ascertain one's potential options. And the sustainable livelihoods approach was developed from development studies to look at the various assets that a community might have that it could draw upon in order to achieve various livelihood options. And these are classified into what originally was the natural capital, the financial, the physical, the human, and the social. But more recently, there's been an awareness that the cultural capital is equally important, particularly in a tourism setting, but also the political aspects to how the community works. So we applied this model to looking at the Dhorpatan Valley, which is an upland valley in the Midwest region of Nepal. And it's an area that is a national or protected area, but rather than being named a national park, as in perhaps Annapurna or Mount Everest further east, it's actually designated as a hunting reserve. And as you can see, Dhorpatan sits in the lowland hills in front of some of the Himalaya, fairly close to Dhaulagiri and Annapurna, and it is in an area of sort of rain shadow, which does dictate the climate there. And it is a large upland valley, about 3,000 meters, dominated by a river, the Uta River, that flows through the valley. And it was made partly famous by a famous book, The Snow Leopard by Peter Matheson, where he goes on a quest to look at blue sheep and snow leopards in the area of Dolpo further north. So it has a slight reputation, I suppose, on an international stage. However, the number of visitors every year are actually very low compared again to places like Annapurna or Everest. You're only talking a handful of tourists. Obviously, during the Maoist uprising, these dropped to almost nothing, and still only really a handful. And it's very seasonal as well, around the traditional tourist seasons, not in the depths of winter, when the valley is very snowy and inaccessible, and in the summer when it's obviously the rainy season. And tourism infrastructure in the valley is fairly limited. There's one guest house and a camping area, but there are still entrance fees, as there would be to other protected areas in Nepal. And as I mentioned, this is promoted primarily as a hunting reserve since 1983. So the clients that it does attract are very wealthy tourists, some from Russia or the United States, who want to hunt big game, particularly these blue sheep that are in the higher areas of the hunting reserve. But these tourists might be paying, upwards of $30,000-$40,000 to hunt and get their trophies. And this really sort of sits in opposition to the residents, I suppose, and the development challenges that are present in living in the Dhorpatan Valley. Our survey kind of indicated some of the transport challenges that are particularly difficult of actually accessing the valley, and also healthcare challenges in terms of access to even basic levels of healthcare. So our studies in the region was actually conducted during COVID, and what we found was really fruitful was working when we were not able as Western researchers to travel to Nepal, but working with a team of local researchers from Pokhara and Kathmandu to deliver some household surveys to look at the options there, and that was a really fruitful partnership. So just very briefly, there's much more detail of this on the chapter, but looking at the livelihood assets that are available to these mountain communities, the natural capital in the valley is obviously an upland alpine region with a large biodiversity of keystone species. One of the interesting assets is this caterpillar fungus, which is very valuable in traditional medicine and is harvested. And in the valley itself, it is farmed, but basic kind of maize and potatoes and apples as well. There's communities are farming basic agriculture, much of which is used for subsistence, but some of it goes to other areas. You can see the split here of the type of crops that they're growing. Now, the human capital is then the skills and the ability to labour and the good health to pursue those different strategies. And obviously, education is an important part of that, and that is limited to one basic primary school in the valley. And one of the important things is that affects a lot of areas in Nepal is outward migration. A lot of young men going to work in the Middle East, and particularly the fact that takes away a lot of the skills and able-bodied males to work in various practices. The physical capital, this is the enabling infrastructure that's available. The area is prone to some flooding, so it's built on a floodplain. There have been some attempts to build bridges, but there are also environmental threats. There was a large fire in 2018 that damaged many houses. And there have been very small-scale aid projects, such as a small hydro scheme. Interestingly, there was an airport, but it's sadly faded, and the access now would only really be by helicopter. And one of the aspects of our study was to look at the transport methods used by local people, and obviously walking dominates, with occasional visits either by jeep or by bus into the town, which is in a lowland area, some 2,000 meters lower down. And it's been noted by many commentators that actually, transport infrastructure is one of the major things that's holding back development in the mountain regions in Nepal. However, the mobile revolution has reached the valley, and it's interesting, even though standard connectivity has been very poor. A lot of people now in Nepal do have access to mobile devices and the opportunities that brings. One of the big physical aspects maybe in the future will be the designation of the valley partly as a large hydropower project, which will be a 200 meter high dam which will obviously have major impacts in taking away a large proportion of the land. There is talk of potential tourism use for this, and certainly employment and infrastructure that may come with it, the positives. But there obviously are large concerns about damming large regions and the impacts that has on environment and communities. Financial capital is obviously very limited, limited amount of savings. A large amount is coming from those overseas remittances from family members who've moved overseas. And you can see that in our survey, which indicated that was a significant chunk, perhaps up to a quarter of income. The social capital of the valley is based on various NGOs, which are quite active in Nepal, and we work closely with them to collect some of the data. And obviously there is distinct cultural capital in the valley of the various groups, some of who migrate from lowlands, but also a large Tibetan community that is also present in the area. So in terms of tourism moving forward, there is certainly significant potential, both from the sheer picturesque nature, I suppose, of the valley, which certainly is very attractive, and its acknowledgement in the Snow Leopard publication, and also combining with existing tourism developments such as the Great Himalaya Trail, which would pass through the valley itself. We also worked with some of our partners to look at the potential for mountain biking, and scoped out and ground truthing a range of mountain biking trails within the area. So there certainly is potential to develop that further, which has been popular in some areas in Nepal. And ground truthing some of those with the team was very fruitful, and looking at potential for e-bikes, both for tourists but also for the local population as well. So that concludes our presentation. There's obviously more detail about that and the operationalization of the sustainable livelihoods approach in the chapter, and we hope that you get to read it, and hope to contact with many of you in the future.